Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Series 2, Episode 4 of the FA Primary PE webinars. Today, we are looking at the current PE landscape. Over the next 45 minutes to an hour, these are our intended outcomes of the workshop. So we're going to be looking at this current PE landscape, and in particular, focusing on engaging parents in the PE provision and its purpose, using PE as a tool to rejuvenate and reconnect with school and school's core values in your own context, and the role blended learning can play in a positive future for PE going forward, particularly over the last few weeks as online learning started to be prevalent in a lot of the PE that we've been delivering. Now, just looking at the chat box, I can see lots of things coming in, and it's clear that the landscape, might vary. And just reading some of the things that are popping up on the screen, that the landscape looks different from school to school. Different circumstances, and certain schools and staff values may be different with regards to PE, and especially with so many people we've got on the call today, it might look different in different contexts. But what we do hope is that over the next 45 minutes, we can provide you with some takeaways to go back and have a positive impact on the PE landscape in your own schools and in your own environments. And I'm pleased to say, to help us to do that and consider this issue, we were very fortunate earlier in the week to be joined by Rick Baldock, the Professional Learning Officer for the Australian Council for Health, PE and Recreation, to record some conversations around the topic and the current PE landscape. And I'm going to play you a short clip in which Rick just introduces himself and gives you a little bit of detail about his background.
First and foremost, welcome, Rick, to our FA PE Unit series. This is Series 2 for us, Episode 4, on being fit for the future. Huge thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Thanks for having me, Chris. Look, I'm an old guy, so I've done a bit. I've been a teacher, both primary school classroom teacher, phys ed teacher, and then I've gone into our education department in South Australia, worked in there, worked on various physical education projects for ACHPA in South Australia, and did a stint in Qatar in the Middle East, writing curriculum over there, and then come back and worked in more project work with primary schools and secondary schools in South Australia.
So I'm sure you will agree we are very fortunate, very privileged to be able to get an insight today into Rick's experience and expertise in the field of physical education. And before I play you the first conversation, I think one thing we can probably all agree on is that the PE landscape has changed significantly over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And as a result, PE in the modern day may look very different to when the parents of our pupils experienced PE for themselves, particularly at primary school, and certainly may look different to how we experience PE as well. So with that in mind, I've just put a couple of questions up there that I'd like you to consider as I play out the first conversation that we recorded. And we know as teachers that engaging parents can have a massive impact on your experience and the experience of the child.
What we did was in week 1 of term 2, we're in term 2 now, we're coming towards the end of it. We actually designed some home-based programs that kids could do with the assistance of their parents. And you'll see that in this document that I'm sharing here on the screen, the green part is what the kids need to know, and the red part is what parents may need to do to support and enhance the learning of their kids. And that came about in the games-based approaches that I'm illustrating here, providing the variations for how the games could be modified or the constraints change, the questions you might ask, and the key points, teaching points, to remind kids about those skill developments. We then went through what the learning intentions were. We designed these lessons so that kids did the same warm-up each week in their lesson, and the warm-up we chose was a dance, the Madison, and they did it to Nutbush city limits. We provided some YouTube clips for them to look at. We also gave them all the steps, and the idea was that when they returned to school, we would all do it together. So it was sort of a bit of a celebration and a bit of fun to come back to, and everybody had learnt this dance. So you can see the various aspects of the dance there. That was the warm-up. Then we went into the games, and this game is taken from a writer in South Australia, Shane Phil, who's at Flinders University. And we decided also to focus with the Year 5, 6s on target games, because we felt that they were easier to play in the backyard, and that they didn't need a lot of people to play against. So a lot of kids are in small families. There aren't a lot of siblings, so they can play these games. There, you'll see there how to change the game, the questions you could ask, and what you might need to remind the kids about.
I think, Rick, sorry to interrupt, Rick. I think, it's great just to hear some of the things that we've been advocating as a PE unit for a long time, and certainly in this webinar series around not just the physical aspects of PE. And I think it's great to see that even, when you're working with parents and parents are delivering some aspects of PE at home, that, you're talking about that differentiation, adapting and modifying games, learning through games is something that we talk about constantly, and the advantages to that, and the questioning techniques and posing those questions to students, and it's not just a physical activity and something we're advocating. So it's it's really nice for us to see that that's happening in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, well, that game-based approach, it has different names in different parts of the world. Here we call it game sense, but in England and Europe you'd most probably refer to it as TGFU. It's all fairly similar. There are slight differences, but yeah, and I reckon this is one of the things that the little feedback that I've had is the teachers really liked it, but I know some parents went, whoa, what's this? So this was a bit of an introduction, and we'll talk about it later most probably, but this was a bit of an introduction to parents about what was going on in PE at school, and how much it's most probably changed from when they went to school as kids.
So yeah, in this next discussion, we spoke to Rick about how we could start to use PE for the return of school in September. So this next 10 minutes really is just another opportunity to share some thoughts in the chat box around these two questions. So once we get into the clip, just start to consider how can PE be used to reconnect and rejuvenate the children after this time of lockdown, but also perhaps moving forward, how could you use, or we use PE to celebrate that return to school in September? So again, use that chat box, share some more of your fantastic ideas as the video is playing.
So Rick, now that children are returning to school, could you just give us a bit of an insight into what part PE has played in the celebration, rejuvenation and reconnection of children since the return of schools?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Things are happening on multiple levels at once. First of all, the kids were just thrilled to be back at school, that returning to normality. And as one teacher said to me today in a high school in Adelaide, we've had to really watch out for these kids because some of them aren't getting the level of normal support that they would get at home. They all come from good families in this school, but he said some of them have needed more support than they ever had before. And he said that's been good for us because we've now got stronger and closer relationships with a lot of those kids, because they weren't getting that same level of support at home that they normally get, so they got it at school. So I thought that was a really interesting comment. The other thing is, they were happy to be back, but I think we didn't take advantage of some sort of celebration for returning to school. Now, our kids weren't in lockdown as long as your kids will be, but, I think it's a great opportunity to celebrate the return to school and the importance of school in kids' lives. And of course, PE is a big part of that, especially for some kids. You know, if kids were like me growing up, I only went to school for the phys ed. You know, I didn't want to, you know, I had to deal with all that other stuff like, you know, maths and English and stuff. That was just the pain, but, you know, it was the phys ed and then the sport after school that I really went for, and to be with your mates, all right? And so I think if schools can set up some sort of celebration, that would be great. Our teachers were just dealing with a changing situation, and it just kept on changing under their feet. It was like shifting sands. And it's really interesting to watch the restrictions come off, because they come off in a phased way. So, you know, we're now starting to open our borders to other states, but we've been told quite clearly the last things that will open are international travel and large crowd attendances at sport. So, for instance, we had the first crowd in South Australia at an AFL football match in Adelaide, and in a 50,000 seat stadium, we had 2,000 people all spread around the stadium. Right, so that was huge, because that was our first crowd back in AFL. That only occurred last weekend, but now we're starting to see further restrictions come off. So it's, you know, we went into lockdown quickly, and then there's phases of return. But like another teacher said to me in another school the other week, you know, like, it was hard for me to remember that we were in lockdown, because I kept coming to school and I kept bumping into the kids, and he said the kids' behaviour didn't change much at all, and they were happy to be back. And he said, so once the kids came back, it was like the outside world just didn't matter. Things sort of became and went back to normal in the school setting. And he said, it was only when I drove home that I went, oh yeah, there are less cars on the road. What's going on here? Oh, that's right, COVID-19. So in some ways, celebrate, but it's that celebration of returning to the more normal part of life. And that's been really important for our kids.
And has there been any kind of ideas around what sort of celebration would look like on that reconnection?
Yeah, well, like the sort of stuff that I talked about before, sharing a warm-up, playing the games that you maybe played when you were at home, sharing the learning with other kids, and I think, you know, just going back to normal. That's the big thing for a lot of kids, and especially when you realise maybe if mum and dad have lost their job at home, you know, that's a stressful situation. So coming to school was a return to normalcy, you know, and how important that is for kids, and giving them that security that that's something they can hold on to. That's a place where they can get that support. I think that's the big thing that's coming out.
Yeah, and again, we're just reinforcing that point around that social element, isn't it? That PE really does provide that social connection, and in our PE lessons, how can we really start to see that and develop that?
Yeah, and in Australia, we have health and physical education both together. So, you know, I keep saying to teachers in Australia, we're responsible for actually teaching those skills, the personal and social development skills. Every other learning area or subject uses them, but we're responsible for teaching them and developing them. So that's something else that's unique besides the physical that we're responsible for. And I keep saying what we want out of our phys ed lessons is not just better players, but better people.
Yeah, and that's certainly something that echoes with the stuff that we're doing with the FA, and we always say about developing the person first before the player.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thanks for those insights, and hopefully that's given the listeners a couple of ideas about how they can start to reconnect and rejuvenate when those kids are coming back into school. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks.
Something to consider in this next video that we're going to play you. The concept of blended learning. This idea of shifting from online to face-to-face is something that's been discussed widely within education at the present time, and I urge you to look at these two questions as we work through this next video, with a view to putting some comments into the chat box that hopefully we can review at the end. But, what role can blended learning play to help positively impact the future of PE delivery going forward in schools? And what do we need to consider if online learning becomes more prevalent within physical education? So 2 important questions for us to look at as this next video is played. Just sort of like turned into a bit of group chat now between us as presenters from the FAP unit and you, Rick, from ACPA in South Australia. In terms of sort of like the impact that COVID-19 has had on parental's perceptions of PE, school sport, physical activity, what do you think some of the implications are for that and for those schools in Australia and those parents in Australia?
Yeah, well, like anything, it's variable. I think, some parents will have a greater appreciation of what teachers are doing and of what teachers' work is, because they've had to sit there with their kids and do that stuff. I think we're hearing some stories about parents going out with their kids and actually it became the activity break for the parent to do the phys ed lesson with the kid. So those sort of things are nice. But that won't be in every case. Like we know families are all different and people react differently and they have different priorities. But I think for some, they'll actually start to know what the kids are learning, how they're learning and how things have changed. I'm hoping too that parents are now seeing that PE is more than just playing games, and that it brings in things like, teaching kids to think critically, to analyse, to critique, to do all of that sort of thing. So that those aspects of critical thinking will be, I think, brought to the fore more. I think too, kids have missed in Australia being able to roam a bit and being able to do what they normally do, because the lockdown has still affected club sport and all of that. That's only just beginning to return now. So schools return first and it's clubs sort of later on. And it seems that the professional side of the game is more important to return first, maybe because of that stuff, rather than anything else. And I think the other thing is, the importance of that personal and social development. And I think the kids really miss that. So that's something they've come back to school with, and watching kids just buzzing, just being able to talk to their neighbours. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, and I think it's that, when we look at children and we think about the skills that physical education can provide, not only for their development within PE, but then ultimately across curriculum and then for wider life, things like problem solving, physical resilience, mental resilience, the developments in self-confidence and self-esteem. I think these types of key skills and characteristics that we want to see embedded within our pupils and flourishing, hopefully we can get PE, school sport, physical activity back on the top of the agenda in terms of, bringing these core skills to life as a view for, the holistic development.
I think what you've said there is just outlined the power PE's got, hasn't it? To that, couple of hours a week that a teacher maybe gets with that class in terms of a PE environment, and the power that can have to build those relationships, which as you say, if online learning becomes a new normal, that phrase that's bandied about a lot, then that time that we do get with the children in an environment where they can be physically active, where they can be playing those games, where they have got that social interaction, is going to be absolutely vital, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep. It's unique. What we do is unique, and we need to remember that, and it's unique because it involves movement and that learning in the physical, through the physical and about the physical. And we've got to get that balance right. But it's that learning through, like when I do a lot of stuff around personal and social development with teachers, and typically the sort of stuff that I go to is Don Hellison's work around teaching personal and social responsibility through physical activity. Teachers come up to me and they say, this is what's really important. It's good that we have better people. If they happen to pick up a few game skills and all of that, that's a bonus. I want good people out of this. and it's sort of, you don't have to go far from where you live. You listen to a guy like Rafa, or you read his book, in terms of tennis, and his parents were quite clear. It was more important that Rafa was a good person before he was a great player. That was what was important, and it shows. It shows, and that caring for each other and those personal and social skills is what's, to me, number one, or sits equally with those other three aspects, the movement skills, the strategies, and then the personal and social development.
I think for me, Rick, that is a perfect way to end our conversation together, because it's music to our ears in terms of the FAPE unit, as the things that you've outlined there, and just everything that we want to get out of physical education, everything we advocate. You've summed up very nicely there. So I think it's a perfect opportunity for us all just to say a massive thank you for your time. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of all the hundreds of coaches and teachers who will be watching this webinar and watching it back in the weeks to come, who will be very grateful for your insight and the nuggets of knowledge, which I'm sure they can take away and start to influence their own practice in terms of PE provision as well.
No, you're too kind. It's great. Keep up the great work, fellas. And, and to all the teachers that are watching, thank you for what you do on a daily basis, for what you do and what you keep going, that extra step to do, because that's what makes the difference. And that difference in some kids' lives is huge. So thank you from the profession.
I think for me, that clear message is developing the person first before the player or the sports person in PE. And we can't make every pupil that we work with into an elite athlete, but what we can do is help them to develop into a good person. And I think, it might be biased, but PE can do that better than any other subject.